A lone police officer, cornered in a dark alley, desperately tried to shield a woman in a wheelchair from two aggressive assailants. All hope seemed lost, but the attackers had made a fatal mistake. They hadn't seen the man walking his dog nearby. What they didn't know was that the man was a Navy SEAL on leave, and his dog was a train protector. A persistent, thin mist clung to Cobalt Creek, Illinois, blurring the town's edges into a watercolor wash of damp grays and browns. It was the kind of weather that gave the Rust Belt its somber, hard-working beauty. But to Caleb Rourke, it just felt like a shroud. He stood on a high path in Patriots Park, looking down on a town he no longer recognized as home. Cal, as his teammates called him, had the lean, powerful build of a swimmer, a physique that not even a civilian rain jacket and jeans could completely conceal. He was in his late 20s, with close-cropped dark hair and eyes the color of the city's overcast sky. It was those eyes that set him apart from the other park-goers. While they looked, he scanned. While they relaxed, he assessed. He was on leave. A mandatory break from the rhythm of the SEAL teams, a forced decompression that felt more like a tightening spring. Out there, life was simple. There was the mission, the team, and the objective. Here, in the quiet chaos of civilian life, there were too many variables. The polite smiles of strangers felt like masks, and the sudden laughter from a group of college kids playing frisbee nearby made his shoulders tense. At his left heel, unbothered by the drizzle matting his sable coat, was Kaiser. Kaiser was a magnificent German shepherd, 90 pounds of disciplined muscle and controlled intelligence. He wasn't a pet. In every sense that mattered to Cal, he was a teammate. Cal had raised and trained him himself, pouring thousands of hours into drills that mirrored his own specialized training. Kaiser moved with a fluid, silent grace, his paws making almost no sound on the wet pavement. His gaze was fixed forward, his delicate ears swiveling, constantly gathering information from his surroundings. He was Cal's anchor and his early warning system, the only living thing on Earth whose rhythm was perfectly attuned to his own. Their bond was built in silence. A minute shift in Cal's weight, a subtle hand signal, a single, soft-spoken word. That was all they needed. Kaiser understood the tension coiling in Cal's shoulders and responded not with anxiety, but with heightened focus. He was the calm in Cal's internal storm. Cal's gaze swept from the manicured flower beds, their blooms heavy and drooping with rain, to the industrial skyline in the distance. He could see the old factory district with its new, gleaming condos, and beyond that, the gritty spine of bridges crossing the Calumet River. The town was a contradiction. It prided itself on community, Friday night football, and a quiet resilience, yet a ragged edge of desperation simmered just beneath the surface. He'd seen it in the darkened downtown doorways, in the hollow eyes of people living in makeshift encampments under the highway overpasses. It was a restless hum, and it was getting louder. He felt useless here, an outsider. His leave was supposed to be a reset, a chance to remember what he was fighting for. But all it did was highlight the chasm that had opened between him and this world. He was a tool built for a specific, violent purpose, and in this polite, peaceful park, he was a hammer in a room full of glass. "All right, buddy," he whispered, the first words he'd spoken in an hour. Kaiser's ears flicked back, acknowledging the command without breaking stride. "Let's walk." He needed to move. He led them off the park's main paths, following winding trails down toward the town. They left the families and joggers behind. The trees closed in, the manicured gardens giving way to a wilder wood, the smell of damp earth and pine filling the air. For a few moments, with just the sound of their footsteps in the rain, Cal felt a sliver of peace. But the trail eventually spilled out onto the streets, depositing them miles from where they'd started, on the edge of the old industrial quarter. The transition was jarring. The air felt colder here, the mist thicker. Quaint artisan shops were replaced by old brick buildings with dark or barred windows. Fewer people were out, and those who were moved with a hurried pace, collars turned up against the chill. The afternoon light was already starting to fail, the gray sky shifting to the darker shades of evening. This was the part of town tourists were warned about, a place where the town's good intentions wrestled with the harsh realities of addiction and mental illness. Cal felt a familiar prickle on the back of his neck. His posture didn't change, but his entire being shifted into a state of relaxed readiness. His pace remained even. He and Kaiser were just two more shadows in the twilight. Kaiser mirrored the shift instantly. His head, which had been held in a neutral position, came up slightly. His nose twitched, tasting the air. He wasn't just walking. He was on patrol. They passed a narrow cobblestone alley, little more than a service entrance between two towering brick warehouses. The streetlights flickered on, casting pools of sallow yellow light that didn't reach the alley's mouth. They were a block past it when Kaiser stopped dead. He didn't pull or whine. He simply froze, becoming a statue of concentration. Cal stopped with him, his hand falling naturally to his side. "What is it?" he murmured. Kaiser's head was cocked toward the alley they just passed. A low growl, more a vibration than a sound, rumbled deep in his chest. The hair on his neck didn't rise. He was too well trained for that. But every muscle in his body was rigid. Cal's blood ran cold. He trusted his dog's instincts more than his own. He turned slowly, scanning the street. It was empty. Then he heard it. A faint sound, muffled by the buildings and the rain. A woman's voice, sharp with fear, pleading, "No, please." The plea was cut short. A split second later, there was a dry, metallic clatter. It was the unmistakable sound of metal hitting pavement, the sound of a wheelchair being shoved hard and tipping over. Cal's leave was over. In the space of a heartbeat, the lost, disconnected civilian vanished, and the operator took his place. Cal didn't run. Running was frantic, and frantic was slow. He moved in a smooth, purposeful glide, his long legs eating up the pavement as he doubled back toward the alley. He tapped 2 fingers on Kaiser's shoulder, a silent command for a tactical heel. Kaiser fell in, matching his pace, a shadow moving in his shadow. The rain, which had been a negligible mist, now felt cold, amplifying the sounds from the alley ahead. He heard another voice, a man's, harsh and slurred. "Give it up." He reached the mouth of the alley, a narrow chasm of wet brick that smelled of damp garbage and desperation. A single, caged security bulb hummed overhead, casting a weak, flickering yellow light on the scene below. It was exactly as the sounds had implied. It was chaos. A woman in a dark blue police uniform was on one knee, trying to regain her balance on the slick cobblestones. Her service cap was gone, and her blonde hair was soaked, plastered to her head, rain and sweat dripping into her eyes. She looked young, mid-20s, with a fierce determination in her jaw that fought with the pain and disorientation in her eyes. This was Officer Jenna Morales. In front of her, teetering precariously on 2 wheels, was a manual wheelchair. In it sat a frail, elderly woman, her thin frame wrapped in a knitted wool blanket. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted between the 2 men menacing them. This was Mrs. Evelyn Gable. The men were exactly the type Cal had been cataloging earlier, the desperate, frayed edges of the town. The one attacking the wheelchair was thin and vibrated with a twitchy, unpredictable energy, his eyes darting everywhere. This was Jitter. He was frantically yanking at an old leather handbag strapped to the wheelchair's armrest. "Come on, old lady. Give it to me," he hissed, his focus entirely on the bag. The other man, clearly the leader, stood between the officer and the old woman. He was taller, gaunt with a sunken chest, but his eyes were ancient and cold. This was Shank. He watched the officer struggle, a cruel, mocking smile playing on his lips. "Back off. Get back now. Get away from her," Jenna commanded, her voice strained. She was trying to get to her feet, one hand moving toward her duty belt, the other held out to ward them off. "Or what, officer?" Shank sneered, his voice a gravelly rasp. He was enjoying her helplessness. "You gonna call for backup? I don't see nobody, do you, Jitter?" Jitter just grunted, yanking on the bag again so hard the wheelchair almost tipped completely. Mrs. Gable cried out, her hands clutching the armrests. "Please, just leave us alone. She's a police officer." "That's the point, ma'am," Shank said. He took a menacing step toward Jenna. To protect the old woman, Jenna lunged from her kneeling position, trying to put her body between Shank and the wheelchair. It was a brave move, but it was also what Shank was waiting for. He shoved her hard, a 2-handed push to the chest. Jenna, already off balance on the wet stones, couldn't stop her momentum. She fell backward, the back of her head hitting the brick wall with a sickening, wet thud. The sound seemed to echo in the narrow space. Mrs. Gable let out a choked sob. Jenna slumped against the wall, her eyes squeezed shut in pain, momentarily stunned. Cal had seen enough. He was a second from moving, but the situation escalated faster than he'd anticipated. Shank saw Jenna go down. The cruel mockery vanished, replaced by a chilling, predatory intent. "Stupid cop," he hissed. He reached into the deep pocket of his ragged army jacket. His hand emerged, and something in it caught the dim yellow light. It was a utility knife, the kind used for cutting drywall, with its long, rectangular blade fully extended. He took a deliberate step toward the fallen officer. Jenna's eyes blinked open. She saw the glint of the blade, saw him coming. She tried to scramble back to draw her weapon, but she was too slow, too hurt. Cal didn't shout. He didn't issue a warning. He remained in the shadows of the alley mouth, a ghost. His entire focus narrowed on the man with the knife. He gave the single command he'd drilled 1,000 times, a word that wasn't a request, but a release. His voice was low, sharp, and cut through the sound of the rain. Engage. Kaiser had been a statue of coiled springs, his intelligent eyes locked on the threat, waiting for the word. The command unleashed him. He didn't bark. He simply erupted. He was a 90-pound blur of sable fur and disciplined fury. He covered the 20 feet of the alley in a second. Shank heard the scrabble of claws on stone. Too late. He turned, his eyes widening in horror. Kaiser launched, his body a missile, his targeting perfect, his jaws locking onto Shank's right arm, the one holding the knife. The thud of the dog's body hitting the man's chest and the clamp of his jaws were the only sounds. Shank screamed, a high, thin cry of agony and terror. The utility knife clattered uselessly to the cobblestones. Kaiser didn't rip or tear. He set his powerful legs, pinning the man against the wall. The entire event, from command to neutralization of the primary threat, took 1-2 seconds. Simultaneously, as all eyes were drawn to the shocking arrival of the dog, Cal moved on the second threat. Jitter looked up from the handbag, his face a mask of confusion, his jittery brain unable to process the attack. He saw Cal only in the last moment, a tall shadow detaching itself from the rain. Cal didn't use a flashy martial arts move. He used the cold, brutal efficiency of his training. He met Jitter's forward momentum with an open palm strike to the man's solar plexus. It wasn't a punch. It was a hydraulic stop, driving all the air from Jitter's lungs in a painful woof. As Jitter doubled over, mouth gaping like a fish, Cal grabbed the back of his jacket and collar, using his own weight to drive the man's face straight down into the wet, grimy pavement. Jitter collapsed in a boneless heap. The alley fell into a stunned silence. The only sounds were the soft patter of the rain, the low, steady growl in Kaiser's chest as he held his prisoner, and Jitter's desperate, wheezing gasps. Jenna Morales pushed herself up against the wall, her vision swimming. She stared, wide-eyed and disbelieving, at the massive German shepherd that seemed to have materialized from thin air, pinning the man who was about to stab her. Her gaze then shifted to the second man, face down on the ground, and the tall, silent figure standing over him. Mrs. Gable was clutching a cross at her neck, her eyes fixed on Cal. "Oh, dear God," she whispered. "An angel." Cal looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice calm. "Just a man with a dog." The alley suddenly became profoundly still. The only sounds were the steady drip of rain from a rusty downspout, the whimpering of Jitter still face down on the cobblestones, and the low, unrelenting growl rumbling in Kaiser's chest. Shank stood frozen against the wall, his face a mask of white-hot terror and pain, his eyes locked on the dog holding his arm in an unshakable grip. Jenna Morales pushed herself to her feet, wincing as a wave of dizziness washed over her. The spot where her head had hit the brick throbbed in time with her pulse. She looked at the scene, trying to process the impossible speed of it all. 1 second, she was facing a knife. The next, her attackers were neutralized and a tall stranger and his formidable dog stood in control of the alley. In the distance, a sound broke the tension. An approaching siren. Someone must have heard the screams and called it in. The sound acted like a switch for Caleb Rourke. The lethal energy radiating from him vanished, retracted and locked away. He became a normal man in a rain jacket. He gave a quiet verbal command to Kaiser. "Out." Kaiser's jaws opened instantly. He didn't back away, but shifted into a perfect guard position, sitting at an angle where he could watch both suspects, his body a silent, imposing threat. Shank, clutching his bleeding arm, slid down the wall, his tough guy facade crumbling into pained sobs. Cal bent down, grabbed the collar of Jitter's jacket and hauled him effortlessly to his feet, spinning him to face the wall. "Stay there," he ordered, his voice even and calm. Then he stepped back, moving out of the immediate scene, his hands visible. He was no longer an operator. He was a witness. A squad car, lights flashing, screeched to a halt at the alley mouth, its headlights cutting white slashes into the gloom. 2 officers emerged, their movements practiced and urgent. The first was Sergeant Al Davis, a man in his late 50s with a salt and pepper mustache and the weary, seen-it-all eyes of a career cop. He was Jenna's senior partner, and his eyes immediately found her, his expression shifting from professional urgency to personal concern. "Morales, you okay?" he barked, his hand already on his firearm. The second officer, Ben Carter, was younger, built like a linebacker, and moved with by-the-book precision. He fanned out, his eyes cataloging the suspects and Cal. "I'm good, Al," Jenna said, her voice shaky but firm as she straightened her uniform. Just got my bell rung. These two were mugging a senior. They. She hesitated, glancing at Cal. This gentleman and his dog stopped them. Davis's eyes took in the scene. Jenna was clearly injured. Two suspects, one bleeding from a dog bite, the other looking dazed, the overturned wheelchair, and the tall civilian who stood with a stillness that was more unnerving than any aggression. And the dog. Davis was a cop. He knew a working dog when he saw one. This was no pet. Get EMS for that arm, Davis ordered Carter, who was already on his radio. He and Carter then moved in to cuff the suspects, their professionalism taking over. Jitter was compliant, his nervous energy gone, replaced by terrified sobs. Shank was sullen and silent, cradling his arm. As the officers worked, paramedics arrived, their presence bringing more light and movement to the narrow space. One of them, a woman with a kind face, went immediately to Mrs. Gable, who was still in her chair, trembling violently. "Ma'am, let us check you out. Are you hurt?" Mrs. Gable waved her away. No, I'm fine, but that young man." Her trembling, blue-veined hand pointed toward Cal. "He saved us. He and that wonderful dog." Cal, who had been trying to stay in the background, found himself the center of her attention. He gave a short, uncomfortable nod. Kaiser, sensing the old woman's distress was now fear and not a threat, surprised him. The dog broke his stay command, slowly walked over to the wheelchair, and gently nudged his head under Mrs. Gable's dangling hand. Mrs. Gable gasped, and then a radiant smile broke across her face. "Oh," she whispered, her fingers stroking Kaiser's broad head. "What a good boy. Such a brave, good boy. You saved us." Kaiser let out a soft sigh, his tail giving a single, slow wag. The contrast between the animal that had just subdued a man and the gentle creature offering comfort was stark. Jenna watched the interaction, her throbbing head momentarily forgotten. She looked back at Cal, who was now being approached by Officer Carter, notebook in hand. "Sir, I'm going to need your statement." "Caleb Rourke," Cal said, his voice flat. "I was walking my dog. I heard a scream. I came to render aid to the officer and the woman." "That's some dog you've got," Carter remarked, eyeing Kaiser, who was now back at Cal's heel. "He's protective," Cal said simply. He offered nothing more, no background, no details on training, no explanation for the tactical precision of the takedown. While he spoke, Jenna studied him. Cops have a sixth sense about people. This man, Caleb Rourke, didn't fit. He was too calm, too efficient. The way he moved, the way he stood, it was all wrong for a civilian. It was the controlled, predatory grace of a professional, someone who lived in a world of violence she only visited on her shifts. He wasn't just protective, he was dangerous. Cal felt her eyes on him. He looked over Officer Carter's shoulder. Their gazes met and held for a long second across the rainy alley. She couldn't see the seal, but she saw the man, and she knew he had saved her life. He saw past the uniform to the resilience and bravery beneath, the same qualities he valued in his teammates. It was a silent moment of mutual assessment and respect. "All right, let's get these two loaded up," Davis grumbled, hauling Shank to his feet. The paramedics were helping Mrs. Gable into an ambulance to be checked for shock. Jenna assured them she'd get checked out at the station. The scene was clearing. As Davis and Carter escorted the two cuffed men toward the squad car, it happened. Jitter was still crying, but Shank, his face pale with rage, stopped. He braced his legs, forcing Davis to stop with him. He turned, his body rigid, and his cold, dead eyes found Jenna. "I'll remember you, cop," he hissed, his voice low and personal, cutting through the rain. It wasn't the usual empty threat of a fresh arrest. It was a promise. Jenna's chin came up. She'd heard it before. But then, Shank's venomous gaze dropped to the ground, settling on Kaiser, who stood beside Cal, watching. A low growl started in Kaiser's chest. Shank's lip curled into a snarl. "You in that mutt? I'll find you." The world narrowed for Cal. The rain, the sirens, the other officers. It all faded. This wasn't a threat against an officer. This wasn't a threat against him. This was a threat against his teammate. It was a line that had just been crossed. A covenant broken. Jenna saw the change in him. It was almost invisible. A slight hardening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. The calm civilian was gone again, replaced by something much colder, much more focused. Davis, oblivious to the undercurrent, shoved Shank toward the car. Yeah. You'll find us right after you make parole in about 10 years. Get in." The car door slammed shut. The red and blue lights swept across the alley, illuminating Cal's face as he watched them drive away. His protective instinct, usually aimed at missions thousands of miles away, had just found a new, very specific target right here at home. Caleb Rourke didn't sleep. He and Kaiser were back in the sterile, temporary apartment he was borrowing, a soulless modern space with gray furniture and glass walls overlooking the Calumet River. It was the kind of place meant to feel like a reward, but to Cal, it felt like a fishbowl. He stood in the dark, watching the rain draw silver lines down the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights, blurred by the downpour, felt a million miles away. Kaiser lay on his mat by the door, not sleeping, but in a low-level state of rest, his head on his paws, his ears working, cataloging the unfamiliar sounds of the building. Cal had spent the first hour going through the rituals that were ingrained in him. He had carefully cleaned the mud and grime from Kaiser's paws. He checked the dog's pads for cuts and ran his fingers through his coat, searching for any sign of injury from the scuffle. Kaiser endured the inspection with patient dignity. He was unscathed, but Cal's mind was still in that alley. It wasn't the violence that bothered him, he had seen and done far worse. It was the threat. "I'll find you, you in that mud." In his world, you didn't threaten a man's teammate. You didn't threaten a handler's dog. It was a violation of an unwritten, primal code. The man named Shank wasn't just another desperate criminal. His threat hadn't been the hot, fleeting anger of a failed robbery. It was cold. It was personal. Cal was on leave, but the part of his brain that ran operations, the part that assessed threats and planned contingencies, refused to stand down. He couldn't just let it go. He couldn't just trust that the system would handle it. He'd seen the system fail too many times. He pulled out his phone. He had one contact in the Chicago area who wasn't family, someone who understood the world he came from. He dialed the number. It rang 3 times. "This better be important, Caleb. Some of us have real jobs," a dry, familiar voice answered. Marcus Echo Vance was a former Navy intelligence specialist who had served with Cal's team. After leaving the service, he'd opened a high-end private security firm in the city. Marcus was a wizard with data, a man who could pull a digital needle from a global haystack. "Marcus, I'm in town," Cal said, his voice low. "I know. My sister saw you in the park, said you looked like you were hunting spies. You're supposed to be fishing, Cal." "I saw something, Marcus. An assault. A Cobalt Creek police officer, Jenna Morales, was the target." A pause on the line. The friendly tone was gone. "Is she okay?" "She will be. 2 men are in custody, but one of them made a threat. I need to know if it's real." "Name?" Marcus said, and Cal could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. "They called him Shank. Gaunt, 30s, cold eyes, old army jacket. He's got a personal beef with cops. That narrows it down to about half the street population. Give me an hour." The line went dead. Cal didn't wait. He paced the apartment. The restless energy of a warrior with no war to fight turned him into a caged animal. Kaiser's head came up, watching him, a silent question in his dark eyes. The next morning, Cal had a new mission. He had the address of the assisted living facility, from the police report, where Mrs. Gable lived. He needed to see her, to make sure the first part of the equation was secure. He clipped on Kaiser's leash. The dog, sensing a purpose, was instantly alert. They drove to Maplewood Senior Living, a quiet, clean building that smelled of floor wax and cooked oatmeal. The woman at the front desk, a pleasant middle-aged woman named Sarah, looked up. "Can I help you?" Her eyes went immediately to Kaiser. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We have a strict no pets policy." "My name is Caleb Rourke," he said, his voice calm and polite. "I'm here to see Evelyn Gable. We were involved in the incident last night. This is Kaiser. He's the one who..." Sarah's professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of awe. She stood up. Oh my goodness. You're the one. Mrs. Gable has been telling everyone you were an angel. And this must be the other one." She came around the desk, her apprehension gone, and looked at Kaiser with reverence. "Please, go right in. Room 21B. They found her sitting by the window in a small, sunny room filled with photographs and knitted afghans. Evelyn Gable looked smaller in the daylight, but her blue eyes were sharp and bright. When she saw them, she put a hand to her heart. "You came," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right, ma'am," Cal said, staying near the door, conscious of his and Kaiser's overwhelming presence. "Oh, nonsense. Come in. Come in." She wheeled her chair forward. "And you," she said, looking at Kaiser, "you come right here." Kaiser looked at Cal. Cal nodded. The dog walked forward, his claws clicking softly on the floor, and rested his great head on her lap just as he had in the alley. "My brave boy," she said, her fingers stroking his ears. "My two heroes." She looked up at Cal. "They told me what you did, young man. How fast you both were. I've never seen anything like it." "We were just glad we were there," Cal said. He felt awkward, unused to such open gratitude. "Officer Morales, she was the one with you?" Evelyn's face lit up. "Jenna? Oh, yes. She's my girl. She wasn't just with me. She was helping me. I'd spilled my coffee, a whole hot cup, on my lap. It was my own fault, but Jenna, she was off duty, and she saw me struggling on the sidewalk. She came running, helped me get cleaned up, and was wheeling me back here when those awful men appeared." She shook her head, her gaze distant. "She's the only one, you know, the only officer who walks the halls here. She brings me the newspaper. She checks on Mr. Henderson in 3C who forgets his pills. She's not just a cop, Mr. Rourke. She's a guardian." A guardian. The word resonated with Cal. It was a title he understood. His respect for the unknown officer deepened, solidified. She wasn't just a victim. She was a protector, just like him. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Marcus. "Call me. Now." He thanked Mrs. Gable, promising to visit again. She held his hand for a moment. "You keep an eye on her too, Mr. Rourke? The world needs more like her." "Yes, ma'am," he said, the words feeling like an oath. "I will." He got in his truck and called Marcus. "Okay," Marcus's voice was all business. "Your guy's name is Robert Shank Collier, and he's a ghost with a rap sheet a mile long, but here's the part you're going to love. He was released from state prison 3 days ago. Overcrowding. His last 2 convictions weren't for theft, not for assault, they were for stalking. Both times, the victim was a female official, a parole officer and a public defender." A cold knot tightened in Cal's stomach. "He's an obsessive, Cal," Marcus said, his voice grim. "He fixates on authority figures, especially women he feels have wronged him. He's not an opportunist. He's a hunter. And he's loose." That night, the rain returned, cold and relentless. Cal couldn't sit in the apartment. He drove, Kaiser in the passenger seat, his dark form a silent, watchful presence. Cal had Jenna Morales' address. It was in a quiet, older neighborhood, a 3-story brick apartment building on a tree-lined street. He drove past it once. He saw the layout, a single main entrance, poor lighting at the corners, deep shadows from overgrown shrubs, a perfect place for an ambush. He parked a half block away in the darkness, cutting the engine. He would just watch for 5 minutes, just to set his mind at ease. He sat, the wipers squeaking a rhythm on the windshield. He was there for 3 minutes when a figure detached itself from the damp shadows of a bus stop across the street. The figure was gaunt, sunken-chested, wearing a ragged army jacket. He lit a cigarette, the small flame illuminating his face for a second. It was Shank. He didn't do anything. He didn't try to break in. He just stood in the rain, perfectly still, smoking and staring at the front door of Jenna Morales' building. Kaiser let out a nearly silent huff of air. He'd seen him, too. Cal's blood ran cold. The threat wasn't a possibility. It wasn't a maybe. It was here. It was active. And it was watching. The dawn broke gray and indecisive, the sky couldn't decide between rain or sun. Cal had been awake for hours. The image of Shank standing in the rain, a predator studying his hunting ground, was burned into his mind. The man's obsession was a ticking clock, and Caleb Rourke wasn't programmed to let a clock run out. He had a choice. He was on leave. This wasn't his problem. He could pass the information to Marcus, who could make an anonymous tip to the Cobalt Creek PD. He could, and should, walk away. But he pictured Mrs. Gable's trusting, terrified eyes. He heard her voice, "You keep an eye on her, too?" And he saw Officer Morales' face, the mix of grit and vulnerability as she tried to get up after hitting the wall. He couldn't walk away. He had to warn her. But he couldn't just walk into the precinct. A civilian, even a heroic one, reporting a man standing still would get logged, filed, and forgotten. He needed to see her face, to gauge her reaction, to know if she truly understood the danger she was in. He had asked Marcus for one more piece of information, where she started her day. The answer was a small, independent diner called the Corner Spoon, a block from her precinct, known for its strong, no-frills coffee and its unofficial status as a cop hangout. He and Kaiser arrived at 0700. The place was warm, smelling of dark roast and fresh bacon. A few officers were scattered at tables, their conversation low, but the place was mostly quiet. He saw her immediately. Jenna Morales was sitting alone in a booth by the window, nursing a large mug. She was in uniform, but her body armor and duty belt were on the bench beside her as if she couldn't yet bear their weight. She looked exhausted. There were bruised-looking shadows under her eyes, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun that did nothing to soften the tension in her face. She was staring into her mug, her brow furrowed, as if the answers she needed were swirling in the black coffee. When Cal and Kaiser walked in, the quiet rhythm of the diner broke. Conversations paused. The cops instinctively sized up the tall, powerfully built man and his formidable dog. Kaiser, on a short leash, ignored everyone, his attention focused on Cal, his claws clicking softly on the tiled floor. Jenna looked up. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, and her exhaustion was instantly replaced by a guarded, professional mask. She sat up straighter, her spine stiffening. Cal moved toward her, not with aggression, but with a quiet, undeniable purpose. He stopped at her table. Kaiser sat at his heel, a silent, disciplined presence. "Officer Morales," he said, his voice low, not carrying to the other tables. "Mr. Rourke," she replied, her tone polite but cool. "This is a surprise. Is Mrs. Gable all right?" "She's fine. I visited her yesterday." He paused, not wanting to do this here, but knowing he had no choice. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She indicated the bench opposite her, her eyes wary. "I'm on shift in 20, but have a seat." He sat. Kaiser settled under his feet, head oriented toward the door, his body in a state of relaxed vigilance. The dog's sheer presence was a statement. Cal got straight to the point. "There was no other way. I was in your neighborhood last night, late." Her eyes narrowed. "Were you?" It wasn't a question. "I saw him," Cal said. "Shank. Robert Collier. He was across the street from your building. He was watching you." The color drained from her face, but her professional mask held firm. She tightened her grip on her coffee mug. "I see. Well, Mr. Rourke, I appreciate your concern. I filed a report about the threat. I'm sure my department will look into this new information." She was politely but firmly dismissing him. Cal didn't react to the dismissal. He didn't argue. He just held her gaze, calm and analytical. He'd seen this kind of bravery before in new recruits trying to hide their fear. He just waited. His silence was more unnerving than an argument would have been. Jenna's gaze faltered, dropping back to her coffee. Her knuckles were white on the mug. "They think I'm overreacting," she said, her voice so low he had to lean in to hear. The admission seemed to cost her. "Do you?" he asked. "No," she snapped, her head coming up, her eyes flashing with frustration. "I've been a cop for 5 years. I know the difference between a drunk running his mouth and this. I can feel him. I know he's out there." "You reported it," Cal prompted, keeping his voice even. "What did your lieutenant say?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her. "He said he believes me." She leaned forward, her voice a furious whisper. "He said he believes me, but his hands are tied. Robert Collier hasn't broken any laws. He has a right to stand on a public sidewalk. They can't violate his civil liberties because he's creepy. They don't have the manpower to post a car at my apartment 24/7. And they can't get a restraining order based on a feeling. So, I'm supposed to be vigilant, check my 6, and wait. Just wait for him to do something so they can finally do their jobs." The raw frustration and fear poured out of her. She was a guardian, as Mrs. Gable had said, but she wasn't being guarded. The very system she'd sworn her life to was leaving her exposed, isolating her in a no-man's land of bureaucracy. She was trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, desperate anger. Her free hand, resting on her thigh, was clenched into a tight fist. Kaiser, who had been motionless at Cal's feet, had been listening not to the words, but to the rising tide of cortisol and adrenaline, the scent of desperation and fear rolling off the officer. He felt her distress. Slowly, deliberately, the big dog rose. He took 2 steps, clearing them, moving past Cal's knees. Jenna started, surprised by the sudden movement. Kaiser stopped beside her, looked at her for a moment, and then gently, firmly, he rested his big, warm head on her clenched fist. The act was so unexpected, so tender, that it broke her. She looked down at the dog. His dark, intelligent eyes looked up at her, unwavering. He wasn't asking for anything. He was offering comfort, strength, a silent, living shield. Jenna's rigid control shattered. A single tear escaped and tracked down her cheek, and she swiped it away with a rough, angry gesture. Her fist uncurled under Kaiser's chin, her fingers slowly, hesitantly sinking into his thick fur. Kaiser let out a nearly inaudible sigh and leaned into her touch. She looked up at Cal, her professional mask gone, her eyes naked and pleading. The tough cop had vanished, leaving a terrified, isolated woman in her place. "I know he's not going to stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The system is useless, and I have a target on my back. I honestly don't know what to do." Jenna sat there, her hand resting on Kaiser's head, the warmth from the dog a solid, grounding presence in her chaotic world. She had just admitted her deepest fear to a man she barely knew. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a colleague. To her trained eye, he was something else entirely, an outlier she couldn't categorize. And yet, his dog was the only thing that had made her feel safe in days. Cal looked at her, then around the now empty diner. The morning rush was over. "Go home, Officer Morales," he said, his voice quiet but definite. She flinched, thinking he was dismissing her. "I have a shift." "No," he said, cutting her off but without unkindness. "You're exhausted. You're compromised. And your head is on a swivel. You'll make a mistake. Go home. Call in sick. Tell them you're taking personal time, but go home." "And do what?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Wait for him?" "No," Cal said, getting to his feet. Kaiser rose with him, his head leaving her hand. "You're going to let me check out your apartment." Jenna's head snapped up. I can't ask you to do that. You're a civilian, if something happened. I'm a man with a very well-trained dog, and right now I'm on leave with nothing better to do," Cal said, cutting through her argument with calm, irrefutable logic. "I saw him watching you. That means he's seen you. He knows your routine. He knows where you live. Let me see what he sees." She stared at him for a long, silent moment. The police manual, her academy training, every rule she'd ever followed screamed at her not to involve a civilian. But her gut, the same instincts that had kept her alive in the alley, told her this man was the only real protection she had. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, Rourke." They went in separate cars. Cal followed her modest sedan, his eyes sweeping the mirrors, checking their six, a habit so ingrained he didn't even realize he was doing it. The streets were quiet, her building was as he remembered from the night before. A respectable but old, 3-story brick building. The shrubs near the front door were overgrown, creating a deep, dark alcove. First weakness, Cal thought. A perfect place to wait. She let them into the front door, her hand visibly trembling as she fumbled with the key. The small, dimly lit lobby smelled of dust and old carpet. "I'm on the second floor," she said, leading the way up the stairs. Her apartment was 2B. As she went to unlock it, Cal put a hand on her arm. "Wait." She froze. He knelt, Kaiser beside him, and studied the lock. It was a standard, landlord-grade deadbolt. He looked at the doorframe. The wood was soft pine. The strike plate was held in by short, half-inch screws. "You're a cop," he said, his voice low. "You should know better." "It's a deadbolt," she defended weakly. "It's a suggestion," he countered. He ran his hand over the door. "Hollow core." He stood and shook his head. "One kick, that's all it would take. One good kick and he's inside." Jenna's face went pale. She unlocked the door and pushed it open. Kaiser, without a command, didn't enter. He waited, his eyes on Cal. "You check it," Cal said quietly. It was an order Jenna understood. She drew her service weapon, her training taking over, and moved inside, her eyes clearing the small living room. "Clear." "Kaiser, search," Cal said. The dog moved in, a silent, furry torpedo. He didn't just wander, he cleared the apartment. He swept left into the small kitchen. He moved right down the short hall, scenting the closed bedroom and bathroom doors. He returned to the living room, sat in the center, and looked at Cal. All clear. Only then did Cal step inside. Jenna watched, astonished. "How does he?" "He's trained," Cal said, his own eyes now scanning. He was looking at things she'd never considered. "Your windows," he said, walking to the front of the apartment. They faced the street where he was standing. "He can see this room. He knows when you're home. He knows when your lights are on." He walked to her back window, which looked out onto a rickety, zigzagging iron fire escape. "And this is how he gets in. The lock is a simple latch. A credit card or a cheap knife would get through it in seconds." He had completed a full security sweep in 30 seconds and completely dismantled her sense of safety. She had thought of her apartment as a sanctuary. He saw it as a tactical liability, a trap. "So, what do I do?" she asked, her voice small. She felt defeated. "We fix it," he said. "We're going to the hardware store." The trip was tense. Cal made her walk in the middle of the aisle with him and Kaiser on her flanks. They bought a heavy-duty, single-cylinder deadbolt, a steel door jammer that could be braced against the floor, and 3-inch hardened steel screws. They bought a security bar for the fire escape window and a simple set of battery-powered motion alarms. They worked in silence, a strange, impromptu team. Back at the apartment, the mood shifted. As Cal got to work, the tension eased. He was a man comfortable with tools. He worked with an economy of motion, a precise, focused energy that Jenna found herself admiring. He removed her existing strike plate, showing her how the tiny screws had barely clung to the wood. "A lock is only as strong as the frame," he said, drilling deep pilot holes. He drove the new 3-inch screws deep into the solid wood stud behind the doorframe. Now they'd have to take the wall out to get through it. As he worked, they talked. It was easier now, with his attention focused on a task. "Why?" she asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Why are you like this? You and Kaiser. You're not just some guy walking his dog." Cal paused, lining up the drill. "Kaiser's a special animal. He's had a lot of training." For his part, he drove the screw home with a satisfying whir. "I'm just on leave." "Leave from what?" she asked, but gently. He looked at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "From a job that requires situational awareness." He decided to deflect. "Why are you a cop? You don't seem like the type." "What type is that?" "The type who enjoys writing tickets," he said. She smiled. A real, faint smile. "No. I got tired of watching my town, this neighborhood, fall apart. I grew up near here. I saw people like Mrs. Gable, good people, getting forgotten. Left behind.
I wanted to be the one who built a bridge, not the one writing the report after they fell."
A guardian, Cal thought again, just as Mrs. Gable had said. He respected that. He moved to the window, starting on the simple security bar. Kaiser, who had been patrolling the apartment, finally settled. But he didn't lie down in the living room. He lay down in the short hallway, his body perfectly aligned with the front door, his head on his paws, facing the threat. He was standing watch. "He's amazing," Jenna said quietly, watching the dog. "He's a good teammate," Cal agreed. "He's not trained to be aggressive. He's trained to be decisive. There's a difference." An hour later, the apartment was no longer a trap. It was a fortress. The new deadbolt was in. The steel jammer was fixed to the floor, ready to be dropped into place. The window bar was secure. Jenna let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 days. Cal. I don't know how to thank you." "You're safer," he said. That was all the thanks he needed. Now he'll look at this place and see a hard target. He'll move on. "I'll make some coffee," she said, the first normal, domestic sentence she'd uttered all day. She was at the counter, the coffee maker hissing as it brewed. Cal was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, finally allowing himself to relax. The apartment was warm. It smelled like coffee. For a second, it felt normal. Kaiser had been motionless, a furry rug in the hall. Suddenly, his head lifted off his paws. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just changed. His entire body went from relaxed to rigid in a nanosecond. His ears, which had been resting, shot up, locking onto the door. Cal saw it. He crossed the room in a second, his hand on Kaiser's head. "What is it?" he whispered. A low, menacing growl, so deep it was more a feeling than a sound, started in Kaiser's chest. Jenna froze, coffee pot in hand. "What?" Cal put a finger to his lips. His other hand rested on Kaiser's neck, a silent command to hold. They were both still. The only sound in the apartment was the hiss and drip of the coffee maker. Cal and Kaiser were a perfect, terrifying portrait of concentration. They stared at the door. Jenna held her breath. Silence. Then, from the hallway outside, a sound. The unmistakable, soft creak of a floorboard under a heavy foot. A shadow slid under the door. Then silence again. The footsteps had stopped right outside the door. The silence in the apartment was absolute, a heavy, pressurized blanket. Jenna stood frozen by the coffee pot, her heart hammering against her ribs. Cal was a statue by the wall, and Kaiser, his entire 90-pound frame vibrating with a silent, controlled rage, remained locked on the door. Creak. Creak. The sound from the hallway was agonizingly slow. It was the sound of a single, heavy footstep testing the old wood, followed by another. The steps, which had stopped, were now moving again, not toward the door, but away. They heard the receding creak. 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 Of someone walking down the stairs. Jenna let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. It came out as a shaky sob. "He's gone," she whispered, her hand going to her throat. "No," Cal said, his voice grim. He hadn't relaxed. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the dark, rainy street below. "He's not gone. He's confirming." "Confirming what?" Cal turned from the window, his gray eyes cold. "He tried the door. He probably heard me drilling. He definitely heard Kaiser. He looked at the dog, still on high alert. He knows you're not alone. He knows you have a dog, a serious dog. And now he knows you have a man in here. He's not scared. He's adapting." A new, colder fear washed over Jenna. Cal was right. Shank wasn't an opportunist. He was a predator. He wouldn't assault a reinforced position. He would find a new way in. He would try to separate her from her protectors. The coffee pot gurgled, a horribly normal sound in the suffocating tension. The rest of the night passed in a state of suspended animation. They didn't sleep. They sat in the small living room, lights off, drinking cold coffee. Jenna in her uniform, Cal in his civilian clothes, and Kaiser, a silent sentinel by the door. It happened at 2:17 a.m. A shrill, piercing siren cut through the silence. It was a repetitive electronic shriek that bounced off the brick buildings. Jenna jumped, her hand flying to the sidearm she had never reholstered. "What is that?" Cal was already at the window. "It's not from the street. It's below." Jenna's phone buzzed on the counter. She snatched it. It was a notification from her car's security app. "It's my car," she said, her voice flat and lifeless. "The alarm. It's coming from the building's underground garage." "It's a trap," Cal said instantly. "A child could see it. He can't get in, so he's trying to lure you out." "He's luring me," she corrected, her mind racing. "He knows I'm a cop. He knows I'll respond." "So we don't," Cal said. "We ignore it. We let it shriek. We call 911. "And tell them what?" Jenna snapped, her frustration and fear boiling over. "My car alarm is going off? We're on the north side, Cal. A noise complaint on a rainy night. We'll get a unit in 45 minutes if we're lucky." She paused, her jaw tight. "By then, he'll know I'm scared," she said, her voice low and fierce. "He'll know I'm hiding in my apartment, afraid to come down. He'll slash my tires. He'll slash my neighbor's tires. He'll break windows. He's using them, my neighbors, as leverage. I won't do it. I'm not a victim, Rourke. I'm a police officer. I don't hide." Cal studied her for a long, silent moment. He saw the guardian Mrs. Gable had described. He saw the stubborn, foolish, magnificent bravery, and he respected it. "You're right," he said. "He's using your neighbors to box you in. So we don't hide. We go." Jenna blinked, surprised by his sudden agreement. "We?" Cal walked to the small duffel bag he'd brought up from his truck hours earlier. It was a simple gym bag, but he opened it to reveal a neatly arranged kit. He pulled out a small, black surveillance earpiece. "We go my way," he said. He handed her the earpiece. "Put this in. You'll be the bait, but you'll be bait with an anchor. I'll have eyes and ears on you the whole time." Jenna fumbled with the earpiece, her fingers cold as she worked it into her ear. "Who are you, Cal?" she whispered. "Someone who's very good at this," he said. He turned to his dog. "Kaiser, watch." The dog's entire demeanor changed, his gaze locking on Cal, waiting for the next command. "The plan is simple. You go to the elevator. You look annoyed, not scared. You're a cop checking on her car. You are the bait. And you? We're taking the stairs." The plan was set. Jenna, her heart beating a heavy, cold rhythm, walked to the elevator. She pressed the G button. The ding of the arriving car sounded like a gunshot in the silent building. The doors opened. She stepped inside, her reflection looking back at her, pale, grim, but determined. The doors closed. The moment they did, Cal and Kaiser were moving. They went to the fire stairs, the door opening and closing with a soft click. They descended the 2 flights in near total darkness, Cal's hand on Kaiser's neck, the dog's paws silent on the concrete steps. The underground garage was a vast, cold cavern of concrete. It smelled of oil, damp, and old exhaust. Half the fluorescent lights were burned out, creating long, deep shadows between the parked cars. The alarm was deafening, a shrieking cry that made it impossible to hear anything else. Jenna's elevator dinged and the doors opened. She stepped out, her hand on her holstered weapon. She looked exactly as Cal had instructed, annoyed. She scanned the garage. All right, I'm coming," she yelled over the alarm as if talking to the car itself. She hit the button on her key fob. The alarm stopped. The sudden, suffocating silence was almost as loud as the noise had been. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water from an overhead pipe. She saw her car, a dark blue sedan, parked in its designated spot. It looked fine. "Probably nothing," she said, her voice wavering. "No," a gravelly voice said from the shadows. "It's something." From behind a thick concrete pillar, Shank emerged. His eyes were wild, his gaunt face split by an ugly, triumphant grin. He was holding a crowbar, and from behind the car opposite hers, Jitter scrambled out, holding a length of metal pipe. He was shaking, but his eyes were fixed on Jenna. They had her. They had cut off her line of retreat to the elevator. "Thought your big dog could save you down here, cop?" Shank sneered. "It's just you now." He took a step, raising the crowbar. Jenna didn't flinch. She just said, "Cal, now." "Too late for that, lady." Shank laughed, lunging. "Kaiser," Cal's voice, calm and clear in her earpiece, said. It wasn't a shout. It was a release. The heavy fire door to the stairwell, which Cal had propped open with a small wedge, flew open. Kaiser erupted from the darkness. He wasn't a dog. He was a 90-pound projectile of black fur and white teeth. Shank, the primary threat, had anticipated the dog. He turned to face it. But Kaiser wasn't for him. He blew past Shank and launched himself in a spectacular, silent arc at Jitter. He hit the secondary target in the upper chest, his momentum and weight sending the smaller man flying backward, his head cracking against the concrete floor. The pipe clattered away. At the exact same moment, a shadow detached itself from the pillar behind Shank. Cal had used the dog as the feint, a 1-2 punch. Shank, his brain still processing the dog not attacking him, had no time to react. Cal didn't go for the weapon. He went for the man. He moved inside the arc of the crowbar, his left hand grabbing Shank's wrist, his right driving into the man's elbow. A short, sharp pop was heard as the joint hyperextended, and Shank screamed as the crowbar fell from his numb fingers. The fight was over. It had lasted less than 3 seconds. The garage door suddenly rumbled, rolling up, flooding the scene with flashing red and blue lights. A squad car screeched to a halt at the entrance. Sergeant Al Davis, Jenna's senior partner, jumped out, gun drawn. He'd arrived right on her prearranged signal. He stopped short, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Jenna, unharmed, her weapon now drawn. Jitter unconscious on the ground. Shank on his knees, howling in pain, held in an agonizing joint lock by the tall civilian. And the massive German shepherd, one paw on Jitter's chest, a low growl the only sound it made. Davis holstered his weapon, his mustache twitching. He looked at Cal. "You," Davis said, his voice full of awe, "are one hell of a dog walker, Mr. Rourke." The garage was a tableau of flashing red and blue lights, painting the damp concrete in garish, spinning strokes. Sergeant Al Davis stood, his hand still near his holstered weapon, his mustache twitching as he stared at Cal. "One hell of a dog walker, Mr. Rourke," Davis repeated, his voice a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. Cal's adrenaline was already receding. The hot, driving rage he'd felt when Jenna was threatened had been replaced by a cold, operational calm. He maintained the painful joint lock on Shank, whose face was a mask of agony. "He's all yours, Sergeant," Cal said, his voice even. He expertly transitioned the hold, forcing Shank's uninjured arm behind his back into a standard cuffing position, then stepped away, handing the suspect over to the uniform. Davis, all professional now, snapped the cuffs on Shank. "Robert Collier, you're under arrest." Meanwhile, Jenna had her own suspect. Jitter was groaning, pushing himself up on his elbows, dazed from the impact of Kaiser and the crack of his head on the cement. Jenna's boot on his back pressed him flat. "Don't even think about it," she ordered, her voice clear and strong. She'd been the bait, now she was the cop. Kaiser, his job done, had backed off. He sat at Cal's heel, his chest rising and falling lightly, his gaze fixed on the cuffed man, a silent, furry guardian. More squad cars arrived, and the scene was quickly secured. Paramedics, looking unimpressed, loaded a screaming Shank with his dislocated elbow and a confused Jitter with a concussion into an ambulance. As the scene began to clear, a dark sedan pulled up, its engine a quiet hum. A woman got out and the energy of the garage shifted. She was in her late 40s, her uniform immaculate, her sharp, intelligent eyes taking in everything. This was Lieutenant Sharon Wallace, Jenna's shift commander. Morales, Wallace said, her voice crisp. My office, 0800. I want a full report. Her eyes swept the scene, the two subdued suspects, the weapons, Davis, and finally, Cal and Kaiser. She paused, her gaze analytical. And who, she said, her tone not unkind, but demanding, is this? Lieutenant Wallace, this is Caleb Rourke, Jenna said, stepping forward. He was the civilian who assisted me in the alley. He's been helping me. Wallace looked at Cal, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Rourke, that was a professional takedown. That dog is a professional. And the takedown in the alley. My officer's report was vivid. Who are you? Cal had known this was coming. I'm just a citizen, ma'am. No, Wallace said flatly. You're not. I was an MP before I joined the force. The only people I know who move like you, who train a dog like that, are not just citizens. I don't like unknown variables in my town, especially ones who know how to pop an elbow. Who are you? There was no way around it. He was done being invisible. I'm on leave, ma'am, he said. Leave from where? Cal sighed, the sound out of place in the din of the garage. The United States Navy, ma'am. Caleb Rourke, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The silence that followed was heavy. Davis, who was listening in, just let out a low whistle. Wallace's stern expression didn't change, but her eyes did. They shifted from suspicion to a deep, profound understanding. A SEAL, she said, nodding slowly. Well, that explains the dog, and the elbow. And the fact that my officer is still standing. Thank you for your service, Mr. Rourke, both here and elsewhere. She's a good officer, Lieutenant, Cal said simply. She was worth protecting. Wallace looked at Jenna, a rare, small smile touching her lips. That she is. Now go home, Morales. Both of you. That's an order. The next day, the precinct was buzzing. Jenna's report, co-signed by Davis, and now including the detail about the Navy SEAL, had made her a minor legend, but she didn't feel triumphant, just a deep, weary relief. She'd spent the morning at the assisted living facility, sitting with Mrs. Gable. She'd told the older woman that the men were arrested, that they wouldn't be back. Mrs. Gable had held her hand, her eyes wet with tears, and said, I knew your angel would watch over you. Now, Jenna stood in the lobby of Cal's high-rise apartment building, a paper bag in her hand. She had to thank him. He was leaving. He'd told her his leave was up and he was flying out tonight. He met her in the lobby, his gym bag slung over one shoulder, Kaiser at his heel. He was no longer the civilian. He was the soldier, his energy coiled and ready for the next mission. I brought you coffee, she said, holding up the bag. It's a bad habit of mine. Thank you, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it.
I don't know how to.
Before she could finish, the building's concierge, a young man with earbuds, interrupted. Excuse me, Mr. Rourke. There was a delivery here for a Mr. Kaiser Rourke. Cal and Jenna looked at each other. Confused, Cal nodded. The concierge wheeled out a large catering box from a high-end local butcher shop, the kind that charged a fortune for a cut of steak. Taped to the top was a small, elegant card. Cal opened it. To the bravest hero in Cobalt Creek, it read in the beautiful, shaky script of an elderly hand. A guardian deserves the best. With all my love, Evelyn Gable. Cal opened the box. Inside, on a bed of ice, were 6 of the thickest, most beautiful ribeye steaks Jenna had ever seen. Jenna started to laugh. It was a real, unrestrained, joyful laugh, a sound of pure relief that echoed in the sterile lobby. She called you an angel, Jenna said, wiping away a tear. She called him a hero. I think she was right. Cal looked at the steaks, then at Kaiser, who was now sitting, his focus lasered in on the box, his nose twitching, a tiny, dignified line of drool on his lip. A rare, small smile touched Cal's face. Seems he's got a fan. They took the steaks and he walked her outside, the mood shifting from humor to a quiet, respectful farewell. They stood on the sidewalk, the city bustling around them. It was a new day, the persistent Illinois rain had finally broken, and a weak, watery sun was breaking through the clouds. They're gone, Cal, Jenna said, her voice serious. For good. With their priors in this case, they won't be out for a long, long time. Good, he said. Thank you, she said, her voice low. I know what you did. You didn't have to get involved. Cal looked down at Kaiser, who was already scanning the new environment, watching the civilians walk by. We're not built to walk away, officer. Neither are you. You're a guardian, remember? You build the bridge. She met his gaze. The gray eyes that she now understood held not just coldness but an ironclad, unshakable sense of duty. He turned to go. My flight's in 3 hours. Will you be back? She asked. Illinois is home, he said, which wasn't quite an answer, but it was all she needed. He put his hand on Kaiser's head. Kaiser, heal. They stood for a moment, the Guardian and the SEAL. A world of respect passed between them in a single look. Stay safe, Caleb Rourke, Jenna said quietly. He gave a single nod, his gray eyes holding hers. Stay safe, Officer Morales. She smiled, a small, genuine smile. You too, SEAL. Cal turned and walked away, his long, fluid stride eating up the sidewalk. Kaiser moved beside him, a perfect, silent shadow. Jenna watched them go. 2 guardians, a man and his dog, disappearing into the bright morning light.